SDG 13, climate action. I think this is probably the SDG that everyone is probably most familiar with. Very hard to turn on the television or pick up a newspaper or look at a blog site without coming across some item relating to climate change. So the underlying principle here is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. I think we're all very familiar with many of the impacts of climate change. Climate change is humanity's code red warning. Our window to avoid climate catastrophe is closing rapidly. I'm sure you're all familiar with the recent reports which are highlighting the huge challenges that face us if we want to sort of meet the 1.5 degree target, which at this stage some people believe is probably, the window has probably already gone on that. But I think it's really important that we activate ourselves as much as we can to try and achieve the best result that we can with the time that we have. Our window is closing rapidly. Different temperature scenarios for the coral reefs. The 1.5 degree scenario, the 70 to 90% gone. And if we go to 2%, it's likely to die off completely. That is such a shocking statistic. And I remember the first time I looked at that, I was quite taken back by how severe that is. If you look at the IPCC report, which you'll find a link to on the module, you'll find a lot of statistics like that, which show pretty stark facts if we end up going to the 2 degree scenario. The sea level will rise by 30 to 60 centimeters by 2100. Again, there's a lot of statistics you can look at on that, and a lot of factors that actually influence that. There's something we'll look at in one of the other modules. Drought estimated to displace 700 million people by 2030. That's only 8 years down the road, or really just a little over 7 years. Medium to large scale disasters will increase from 40% from 2015 to 2030. These are all very stark predictions, and unfortunately some of them seem quite accurate. Energy-related CO2 emissions increased 6% in 2021, and that was reaching the highest level ever, and that was in spite of us being in a global pandemic. Climate finance falls short of the 100 billion yearly commitment that was made to developed countries, and it provided 79.6 in 2019. So you can see there's a lot of aspirations, but unfortunately there's a lot of shortfalls in what people are actually doing. The rising global temperatures continue unabated, leading to more extreme weather and more extreme weather events and disasters. So there's only 5 targets for climate action, but they're all obviously incredibly important. Strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters in all countries. So basically be prepared for what we need to do and get active and do something about it. Worldwide, approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people live in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. For example, 1.7 million deaths worldwide were linked to extreme heat and cold in 2019 alone. These are really important and very urgent targets to be addressed. The indicators for this target are the number of deaths, missing persons, and directly affected persons attributed to disasters per 100,000 population, the number of countries that adopt and implement national disaster risk reduction strategies in line with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and the proportion of local governments that adopt and implement local disaster risk reduction strategies in line with national disaster risk reduction strategies. Fortunately, I think in Ireland we're very fortunate that we are score well on that particular SDG. We have a lot of finance, a lot of effort and energy being put in by the various government departments and local authorities in addressing and proactively engaging with climate adaptation and climate change mitigation. Target 13.2, integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies and planning. Again, I'm glad to report that we have been doing that, and there has been a lot of time and money spent, a lot of time and effort put into developing national policies and strategies. And we will be having a look at these in some detail later on. The National Climate Plan, the National Climate Action Plan, there's a number of publications. You'll find links to them all at the reference section of the modules, and you'll also find links to them at the front of the module program page on Moodle. The indicators are the number of countries with nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies, national adaptation plans, and adaptation communications as reported to the Secretariat of the UN National Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the total greenhouse gas emissions per year. They're the target or the indicators that are going to be looked at to monitor this particular target. Target 13.3 improve education, awareness raising, and human and institutional capacity on climate change mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning. Again, this is a really important target to enable us to be prepared for the future changes that we're going to see coming as a result of the imminent climate change that we are going to be dealing with. The indicator for this is the extent to which one, global citizenship education and education for sustainable development are mainstreamed national education policies. And again, I like to report that ATU have been attempting to engage with all of these issues in relation to policies, curricula, education, and assessment when it comes to embedding sustainability in programs and courses that are developed by ATU. Target 13A, implementing the commitment undertaken by developed country parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to a goal of mobilizing jointly 100 billion annually by 2020 from all sources to address the needs of developing countries in the context of meaningful mitigation actions and transparency on implementation, and fully operationalize the Green Climate Fund through its capitalization as soon as possible. In a nutshell, basically, it's putting that $100 billion together annually to address climate change issues. We mentioned it earlier on, and the targets aren't being met yet, but at least we have good targets to aspire to. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change sets out the basic legal framework and principles for international climate change cooperation with the aim of stabilizing atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases. I'm sure you're all familiar with greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, and that. We will be going into the science of that in some detail in the later blocks, but I'm sure you're familiar with that for the moment. It will be monitored by looking at the amount provided and mobilized in US dollars per year in relation to the continued existing collective mobilization goal of the $100 billion through to 2025. Target 13B, promote mechanisms for raising capacity for effective climate change related planning and management in the least developed countries and small island developing states, including focusing on women, youth, and local and marginalized communities. Many islands have already experienced considerable impacts of climate change, making efforts to implement climate change adaptation a critical issue for them. As you can imagine, islands, especially islands that are fairly flat, are obviously much more vulnerable to issues with climate change and raising sea levels. This target will be monitored by reviewing the number of least developed countries and small island developing states that have national strategies in relation to this target that are reported to the Secretariat of the UN. So, in spite of it being probably the most well known and certainly I would think perhaps the most important issue in relation to the SDGs, there are only 5 targets, but they're all really important, and we will be reviewing these in greater detail in the appropriate module. It's probably just worth remembering one or two key statistics. Over 3.5 billion people are currently living in areas highly vulnerable to climate change, and this figure will continue to rise. 3.5 billion, that's 30-40% of the population of the entire planet. Policies, awareness, and frameworks with specific supports for developing countries is required. So hopefully by getting people to engage with the SDGs, look at the reporting structures, look at the information that we receive back, we will be able to address and hopefully support the people who are living in these vulnerable situations.